Hello and welcome back to Election Time News America. Today is Saturday, November 8th, 2025. We're going to be looking at the 2025 election results happened this past Tuesday. Election Time News are one stop for all things elections and politics, from summations to poll reviews and news. Subscribe below for more content about American, Canadian, and Australian elections. Also, make sure to follow the Substack, that's Instagram and X, as well as check out our website, electiontimene.ws, link in the description below for more news, feeds, and latest predictions. Moving on, shifting it on over to 2026 at the moment. Remember, there's never a dull moment in politics. So, a lot happened on Tuesday. And so it was generally an off-year election. But the overall results were from actually there was a lot that happened. I mean, House of Representatives, you had one, Texas 18th. There's a runoff happening at some point. A lot of state elections. Three of them were in Virginia, Pennsylvania. Three retention races for judges. Georgia Public Service Commission, two elections there. New Jersey General Assembly, Virginia House of Delegates, both of those are their House. And 24 ballot measures across the country, as well as hundreds, not hundreds, well, yeah, in general across the country, hundreds of mayoral elections. And these are just city ones that count as cities. But there's a lot more than just that. So, and most of them are either Democratic gains or Democratic holds, which does say a lot about how good of a year this was for Democrats, considering how far down the ballot it went. Usually these races are a lot closer. But even then, you still have, in this list, you only have one Republican gain, one single Republican gain. That was an independent, too. Republican hold. Three Republican wins. And the question is whether or not that actually ended up being won there. Miami, I think there is another runoff or something like that. But anyway, a lot happened, and what was widely described as a blue wave election. They won basically everything possible here that they could have potentially won. They won both New Jersey and Virginia instead of the potential flip that happened, that was potentially going to happen, as well as Virginia House of Delegates. They flipped a large portion there. So going from this in 2021 now to this in 2025, I mean, that's not, it's 26, 24 now. That definitely poises the Democrats to be able to take a majority of these governor's mansions in 2026. So now let's break down by each individual state what on earth happened. And so to start off with the biggest surprise. Now, not based on our projections, we only had it 5.5 points off, which was actually very, very close compared to how far everyone else did. One of the best in the entire industry was 5.5 point error. Polls were even further off. It was almost under a point, back and forth for the polling error, but in the state of New Jersey. So what we had in New Jersey was, yep, there it is, okay, is in fact a victory for the Democrat. That was, oops, these are down here. If I move this up, we'll get to the ballot measures at the end. Now, this is about 98% reporting. So they're not completely done. They have a few mail-in ballots that are left. So this margin will increase by a teensy little bit. But Mikey Sherrill, as of right now, won by 8.2%. If we look down at the general election polls, 4.8 was the final polling average. So it was considerable, and she only had 50% in Decision Desk HQ and 50 plus 1's polling averages. 50 plus 1 is supposedly the new 538, and 50 states plus 1 for DC. Decision Desk HQ, who called all of the races very early in the night, basically right away. They got every single one of them right. plus 5. So, I mean, only plus 4.8. And it ended up being considerably more than that. Even the most bullish here, 5.7 for 50 plus 1, was short. And so this was a very strong showing for the Democratic Party, especially compared to if you look at 2021, what happened there. I mean, incumbent Phil Murphy only won re-election by 3.2%. And so that was, yes, a very, very red year. I mean, again, you look at, Youngkin, but again, that was a year after Biden won the state of New Jersey by a considerable amount. He won it by 15.9%. So that's a drastic trend in 1 year. And this was Jack Ciattarelli. This was his first election here where he ran. You can see 40.5%. No number yet because we don't exactly know how many people turned out. But you can see he considerably underperformed himself. 42.86%. to 48.00%. That is a considerable drop. That's just over 5%. Meanwhile, Cheryl overperformed Murphy by about 5. So it's a considerable overperformance from 2021. And so what you ended up with was just basically a complete landslide, especially compared to, again, what we were seeing. The official results by county are not officially in yet because that's not done yet. And actually, they don't even have them. They removed them in these two. Oh, no, these are where the last remaining votes are. That means that these are, in fact, completely counted at this point. Cheryl won her own district by a whopping 15%. It was expected to be a bit closer than that. She won by 15. She won Powell's district by almost 30. Who herself, Nellie Powell, only won by 4 in 2024. That was a very difficult cycle for 5. Very difficult cycle for the Democrats, especially in that region of the state. So that definitely goes to show exactly how Cheryl was able to get those voters out. Ciattarelli did win Van Drew's district by 8. So again, it shows that it's not quite the same as on the presidential level. But, Van Drew. But Keans actually did go blue for Cheryl. And so it's actually Kane. Won Kane's district. And you can see here in the exit poll for CNN, basically every single demographic went for Cheryl. This is basically completely how she won the race. Moderates split almost 2-1 for Cheryl. Okay, and it was 1-1 out of 3, right? And this is the other problem. If it's all 1/3 each, then all you need to do is have these be matched and then have this be just over in your direction as Ciattarelli. But that's not what happened. 11% of conservatives voted for Cheryl. 6% of liberals voted for Ciattarelli. That should be reversed. And this should also be reversed if Ciattarelli was going to really win. Party. 2% of Democrats voted for Ciattarelli. 7% of Republicans voted for Cheryl. And 56-43 for Cheryl. 38% were Democrats, 31 each of Republicans and Independents. That's, again, the wrong numbers. You don't want that as Ciattarelli. So once you see these numbers, you can see pretty easily how he won. If you approve of Trump, you voted Ciattarelli. If you disapproved, you voted Cheryl. That makes sense. That's going to be the independent divide. Presidential vote. Harris plus 8 environment here, which means that the general vote was bluer than it actually was in New Jersey. It was D plus 6 in New Jersey in actuality, and 3% didn't vote. So again, that's going to be, most of them voted for Cheryl. So that's going to be a bit of a bonus here. Ciattarelli only won men by 1 percentage point. 1 singular percentage point. That is not a good sign by almost any means here. Education by race, the only one that Ciattarelli won was whites without college degree, white women without college degree, white men without college degree, white men with college degrees actually won them by 4. And every single educational attainment, except for never attended college, went blue as well. So, Again, all of those were basically just showing that Mikey Sherrill was going to win. It was very strong. If you watch the live stream, you can see that I legitimately say, okay, none of those are showing a potentially close race. And it wasn't. It was a considerably stronger margin than most people expected, especially going into this election. Cettarelli ran another very strong campaign. It was just Sherrill did strong enough, was able to get the right messaging in, and got and covered the right issues. We're going to get to the Republicans and Democrats' path forward near the end of the video. General Assembly. 3 gained seats for the Democrats. Nothing insane. 8 seats have yet to be called as of right now. But you can see they flipped the second one that's mostly in Burlington County area. The one down here, which is one of the counties that Sherrill managed to flip, flipped both in here and flipped one right there. It does appear. I don't know where that 3 comes in then. But anyways. State Navigate, solid D. It wasn't really ever expected that this would be necessarily competitive. This isn't really the large shock that was necessarily out of the 2 statewide races that would come in Virginia. Virginia was a huge success story for the Democrats on Tuesday. And so Abigail Spanberger beat Winsome Earl Sears by exactly 14.5%. That is a whopping 16.4 point shift from 2021. And so she also got enough votes to beat Youngkin by 300,000. So that is 250,000. So that's another interesting fun fact. I don't have the turnout number yet, but it's going to be even higher than 2021. Huge increased turnout in the state of Virginia. This one was very obvious that it was going to go poorly, but how strongly it went poorly was quite surprising. And so you ended up having was a considerably, everyone had at least lean D for inside elections, likely, safe for state navigate. They necessarily being exactly too incorrect here. Randomly Bill Nye endorsing Spanberger, but final polling average was 9.7, and so even that was basically underestimating by 5. So that was just how strong of a performance this was. There was some momentum for Earl Sears into late October, but then it completely froze up again. She was only down by 10 there, 10 there, 8 there, 7, 5 in this Qantas Insights poll, but the last one that they did had her down by 9. So they did show that momentum going backwards again, completely slipped and fell off entirely. And so strongest one was 50 plus 1 again, 10.7. Looks like they're going to be a bit Democratic strong, but you can see here that Spanberger won even competitive districts, Whitman's district, Kiggins district. Those 2 are somewhat competitive. Those are on the eastern side of the state. Whitman is Virginia 1. Kiggins is Virginia 2. That does mean that they are at higher risk now in going into 2026, especially Kiggins, which was somewhat to be expected. Flipped the seat. It was a bit more Republican-friendly going into 2022. Red enough environment. Kiggins flipped it against the incumbent Luria, and then won re-election against Carter Smuzzle in 2024 by a relatively comfortable margin, 3.8%, only 0.4% better than she did, but the percentage margin in Virginia basically didn't change a single bit across the state, so that's not that unexpected for a situation like that. But again, winning both of those districts does show that there's strong support statewide. And again, it was a basically complete blowout. If we look at the exit polls here, if they do in fact have them, yes. Conservatives only went 90-10 for Earl Sears, even worse. Moderates went 69-31 for Spanberger. Independents voted 19% for Spanberger, 93-7 for Earl Sears, 99-1 for Spanberger for Republicans and Independents, respectively. Again, that is to be expected, but interestingly, disapprove 7% voted for Earl Sears, approve only 6% voted for Spanberger. That's actually a little bit backwards, you might think. Most important issue, immigration, most voted for Earl Sears, but economy, 63-36. Healthcare, 81-18. Education, 55-45. This is interesting because education was the main issue that allowed Youngkin to win in 2021, and Spanberger won on it by 10. 99-1, not surprised. 93-7, 7% of the people in 20. This is also a D+9 environment. That is not how blue the state was in 2024. It was only D+5.8. So again, a very blue electorate in Virginia. But 7% of the people in Virginia that came out and voted for Donald Trump, then voted for Abigail Spanberger for governor. So either they regretted their vote if it was they saw it as a more nationalized race, or they went and just decided that they wanted a more active approach and just didn't see Earl Sears as being that candidate. Another candidate and did not vote. Both of them went for Spanberger. Interestingly enough, Earl Sears did better than Chattarelli with men, winning them by 3, but women went for Cheryl by 30. Every single income group, 100,000, 199,000, only by 3, but every single one went to Spanberger. Earl Sears won white voters by 6. That was 71%, but 16% was black, and 93-7. And that is a bit high. She is a black, Earl Sears is black, so that does make some sense. But again, 71-29 for evangelical Christians. White men is the only group here that voted for Earl Sears. So again, you're just seeing all of this. Rural voters only voted for Earl Sears by 8. So again, you're seeing this pattern where all of these key demographics that needed to go Republican just kept on going Spanberger, 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 and that's what we are going to keep seeing throughout the entire analysis, all of these exit polls. Looking at the Virginia House of Delegates, this is the huge surprise. Here are the House of Delegates districts and how they went in 2024, and this is the map. Flip the one central in western Loudoun County going down here. This is Prince Charles County going down here. The central area, outer Norfolk, the entire greater Bay area out here. The one surrounding Montgomery County and going in there, as well as the one finally in the Chesapeake area, Chesapeake County region. All of those flipped. Those were basically every single one that was relatively feasible. 13 flips, and they won the popular vote by 15, which actually outperformed Spanberger by a little bit. They won by 15. So this is even more impressive by popular vote. And so what you have now is almost a supermajority. So that's 64 seats to 36, which means that almost certainly a push for redistricting in the state of Virginia will go through, and most likely it will probably be a 10-1 map, if I had to guess, because there are a few on there, or if they want to be a bit more safe, they'll just push for one more district, just a few more, leaving 2 in the Appalachia region, but that would be 9-2. So either way, potential lots of gains for Democrats in the state of Virginia, and so that's going to be pretty rough here. I mean, you can see even R plus 1.2 flipped. R plus 2.9 flipped. And all these margins are for 2024 president. D plus 9.4, Republican held it. De-seated. I'm pretty sure that he had been there for a long time. No, 2023. There's one that had been in the House for a long time. R plus 1.6 deseated. So again, D plus 4.9 had held it for a good bit, deseated. D plus 1.1, deseated. D plus 4.2, deseated. So basically, every single district that Kamala Harris won now is represented by a Democrat, and a few that Trump only won by low single digits have been flipped as well. So that was a largest majority since 1987. This is a large success for the Democrats. Next is New York City. This is going to be another big one and has large ramifications as well. This one was actually a surprise in a few different ways. First off, that Curtis Sliwa only got 7% of the vote. This was actually relatively lower than a lot of the polls had it as. If we look down at polling, you can see Sliwa was at 17%. And so that is a considerable overestimation of a Republican, which usually never happens. But, wow, turnout up by 16 percentage points. If you look back here, 23% turnout to 40%. That is impressive. So, that's very, very impressive for the state of the city of New York in an off-year election. But, still not completely reported, and so most likely, though, Mamdani is going to end up having a majority of the vote, and so that is a pretty big result for the assemblyman. And so if you look, they don't have these yet. They don't have those refined results yet, or that not even close, but they do have congressional district. You can see that Cuomo did squeeze out wins in some of these regions, but by borough, not even that close. So, except for Staten Island, which Curtis Sliwa won in 2021. He again did not do very well, but now Mamdani did do a relatively accurate to these. Of course, they did underestimate his percentage. A lot of these undecideds did end up breaking for him. But as far as the top line lead goes, Decision Desk HQ is relatively accurate as far as that goes. But Cuomo was also underestimated. Obviously, those undecideds made up their mind. 14% went to Cuomo. Well, no, except there wasn't 14% to go. Curtis Sliwa's voters probably went for Cuomo, as they saw that he didn't really have much of a chance of winning, and then the undecideds went to Mamdani. And if we look at the results here, part of the 3rd district here is performance in the June primary, Harris's performance, Adams' performance. So Mamdani's performance compared to Adams, that he did relatively better. Harris's performance, he did even better than that. And his performance in the June primary, he did a bit better in Staten Island and a bit worse, actually. I believe that is, no, worse everywhere, except for in, that is, in the Bronx, but did underestimate turnout by a good bit in this. I just said 1250. Was trying to just generally crack down on general guesses. I did kind of guess that Mamdani would win these 4, and then this one would go elsewhere, but no, Sliwa did not do very well. He did not get 246,000 votes, which is interesting because he turnout was way higher, but he just did so much worse in the general popular vote that he actually didn't even get that many votes. So, that's again a bit of a surprise. 98% of the vote is reporting. Zohran Mamdani will be the first Muslim mayor sworn in January. Then we move on to Georgia. Now, this was another big surprise, again, in how it unfolded specifically. And how far it went, really. This is the first time since 2006 that the Democrats have won any non-federal statewide office in Georgia, and they won them by a lot. This is a very blue Georgia. This is as blue, 63 to 37. If we look at 63-37, that's bluer. That's a little bit redder than California in 2020. That is a little bit 63-37. That's the only real comparable state is California. 63-37. And so Hawaii's also kind of close. 63-37. And so absolute blowout here. And I mean, Democrats won Mike Collins' congressional district and Rick Allen's congressional district, only lost Marjorie Taylor Greene's by 13. Right? So Johnson did phenomenally and only lost Brian Jacks by 9. Won Buddy Carter's by 7. So both of these are candidates that are retiring. And Democrats just won their districts, which are now going to be open, by low single digits, but still, those are supposed to be safe districts for Republicans. It's an intentionally gerrymandered state. Make sure to check my video out on the gerrymandered benefits across the country. But Carter by 24 and Collins by 26, both of those districts went blue. So when you're looking at the potential ramifications of how big it's not going to be to that scale, but still, are you potentially going to end up with these races in the House being a lot closer than Republicans could potentially have feeling comfortable about? Peter Hubbard, essentially the exact same thing, not actually performed a little bit better, 0.4% better than Alicia Johnson did. And so the only real change there is Buddy Carter's by 8. Literally got 93.5% of the vote in Williams' district, which is the 5th congressional district, right smack dab in the middle. She only won by 71, and she got 85% of the vote. He got 93.5. That is squeezing basically every single vote you physically can. And he only lost Marjorie Taylor Greene's district by 7. She won re-election by 28, by the way, and in that same district, how much did Trump win it by? I think we're going to have to go to the presidential page and then look at the by congressional district. Won Marjorie Taylor Greene's district by 37. 37 points. So from 37 for Trump to then only 13, that's 13, to only 13 for Johnson is an insane swing. If you look at the swing by, I don't even think they have a swing map just because the entire thing would just be solid blue. But again, if we look at these in 2018, which was again a very blue year, they managed to force them into a runoff. But they still ended up losing 51.75 to 48. That's 3.5 points. They ended up losing by 3.5 points in these races. And if you look at District 3, District 5, that's also by 3 points. So they lost the original race by 3 points. They lost both those races by 3 points in 2018. And this race is going to be up in 2026. But that is an insane number to look at. In 2016, it wasn't even close. There wasn't even a Democrat running here. Okay, 66.58 to 33.42, and I'm not sure exactly why it was a special election necessarily, but I have to look into that. But still, again, that is absurd. The turnout was ridiculously low, which definitely would just help Democrats. But again, looking at an election that's that blue in the state like Georgia only shows how things are going to continue going in these low turnout, low propensity electorate elections for Republicans in the near future. And then we get to... I apparently closed it. Then we get to Pennsylvania with the 3 judge retaining elections there, and that wasn't even close either. I mean, 61.7 to 38.3, and for some reason, Wecht did a little bit worse than Donahue and Doherty. I'm not exactly sure why, but that's an 0.8% difference. Both of those are perfectly even. I don't get it, but Chester County provisional ballots, they had some issues there. But anyway, I mean, this map is more insane than Shapiro's was, right? Shapiro didn't win Montour or Columbia or Wayne or that's Pike County or Union or York. Narrowly lost Lancaster County, lost Westmoreland, and lost Washington. So all of those went red for Doug Mastriano. Okay, they went red for Doug Mastriano. Lancaster only by like 1.5 points. But it still ended up being an insane blowout of almost 2-1 to retain with over 3 million votes. And so that turnout isn't like phenomenal. But if we compare it to 2024, you can see here, that's 3.5 million votes for Donald Trump, right? So if you look at the exact numbers here, 3.577, 3.543. The total amount of voters in Pennsylvania is 30,000 more votes than Donald Trump got in 2024. So it's about half the turnout, roughly speaking, minus all the extra registration since the election. But it's still impressive considering, again, it does just go to show how poorly Republicans are expected probably to do in the future in these low propensity situations. All of them won by a considerable margin. It was even more insane when the polls first closed. It was like 80+% for both. And so, it was a 60-point margin to start it off. Weirdly enough, Wecht didn't win like any of these counties. Randomly with these two were a bit different. Northumberland went yes for Doherty, and then Wecht randomly didn't win York County. I'm not exactly sure the difference or why or how that would have exactly happened, and also apparently didn't hit the 70% margin in Delaware County as well, and no was over. I don't know. There's a few minute differences here, and I'm not exactly sure why, and it might just be random raw luck. But either way, 62% or 61 to 38 or 34 for those Supreme Court retentions in Pennsylvania, which went red by 1.7% last year. And then finally, all the propositions, especially looking in California. They're definitely California, Proposition 50 being the number one thing. Proposition 50, it specifically says other temporary changes to congressional maps in response to Texas partisan gerrymandering, legislative constitutional amendment. That's basically expressly what it says, known as the Election Rigging Response Act, and it passed handily. It was called on poll closing, and so 77% counted so far. But basically, on poll closing, because of these Oh, yep, yeah. Revealed their markers through a small hole in the envelope with ballots folded such that the hole lined up with the markings on the ballot. That was a very big deal on but anyway, yes, won quite considerably, and so from there we now have there's no exit polls, but those exit polls were also insane, and it was actually able you were actually able to see if I can pull it up really quick. CNN exit polls right there, and then we can get to California. There we go. Easy enough. And so both men and women voted yes. That right off the bat is enough to say that it won, okay? Men are considerably more conservative than women, just across the country. That's just a general truth at this point. And they were only 10 points behind, interestingly enough. And they voted 61-39 yes. If you look at race, white voters by 16. If you look at age, all of them, yes. If you look at age by race, every single one of them voted yes. If you look no college degree by 16. White voters with no degree voted no by 4. That is the only demographic so far. White women with no degree by 2. White men with no degree by 10. Republicans 87-13. They are 23%. Independents voted for it by 14. You would need that completely flipped. 96-4 for Democrats, and they're 45%. You need a 96-4 split for Republicans as well, plus an additional 2-1 vote from those independents in order for it to fail. And that just did not happen. So that explicitly is why it was called on poll closing, is because these were released on poll closing, and it was very obvious from poll closing that it was going to pass. That's a large win, but also embedded in that is also a loss for something very interesting. If you get down in the splits in these exit polls, opinion of Trump as president -30, not surprised. Part of MAGA, 82% say no. Republican MAGA 13, Republican not MAGA 10. 2024 presidential vote D plus 23, 3 points more blue than the general public, but again, here is the big thing. That's going to be interesting about want Newsom to run for president in 2028. Yes, 46%. No, 53%. That is -7. This same D plus Harris plus 23. D plus what, 20 something? Independents outnumbered Republicans in the polls in California on the second. And it was D plus 13 to independents. D plus 13, Harris plus 23 electorate does not want Newsom to run for president by 7 points, and does not want Harris to run for re-election by 36%. 36%. That is insane. And also interesting is that 2/3 of the people that voted no on Proposition 50 just said that it wasn't the best way to draw lines in California. They did not care about Democrats gaining seats. 82% said that it was to counter GOP changes elsewhere, and only 17% said that they thought it was the best way to draw lines in California. So the reasoning is completely flipped. So essentially, that is why I was able to be called on poll closing. It was so overwhelming. Colorado, these are just two about spending. Retained spend above the annual estimate of just over $100 million. Lower the state income tax deduction limits. Raise taxes on people making $300,000 or more. And apply towards the Healthy School Meals for All program. Maine, this was also interesting. They failed a photo ID ballot measure. Okay, they failed a ballot ID measure in Maine by almost a 2-to-1 vote. That's a relatively considerable margin. On the same ballot, they also passed a gun restriction law by almost basically the exact same margin. I mean, 62-64. So actually, more people said no on the voter ID than said yes on the restrictions to firearms initiative. And you can read on that more if you'd like. This was something about a sports complex and locking in more forest preserves. $2.5 billion general obligation limit. Texas, here we are. There were a few here. Prohibit capital gains tax, passed. Establish special funds, passed. Denial for bail for certain crimes, passed. Passed. Every single one of these passed. Now one of these is just a reaffirmation of something that is already a law in the United States. Put in the Texas Constitution that persons that are not citizens of the United States cannot vote in Texas. That's just re-solidifying a law. And then you also have amend the state constitution to provide that parents have the right to exercise care, custody, and control of the parent's child, including the right to make decisions for the child's upbringing, which is generally going to be used for restricting enforcement of certain things in the classroom, most likely. In Washington, long-term services and supports trust fund to be established. In Wisconsin, this was earlier this year as well. Amends the state constitution. They passed the photo ID requirement. This is just reaffirmed. There was a law that was passed, and this affirmed it into the state's constitution so that it could not be challenged by the court. So all of that did, in fact, happen. Not all of that, though, did happen, in fact, on Tuesday. Maine did. These few in Texas did. Parental rights, citizenship, voting requirement, and now when all of these happened on November 4th, actually, all of them on Texas. Ohio was May 6th. New York, May 4th, or November 4th, November 4th. Yeah, all of this has happened at some point. Washington also was on November 4th. So now we are finally to the point where we can say, all right, what does this say about the future of the Republican Party? Because things are not going to be looking good for them. And so what we have is they're going to need to obviously work to get these low propensity voters. They now have the same challenge that Democrats had back in 2010, and that was a terrible year. It was long before that, right? 2002 was an off-cycle year, and Republicans gained seats even though Bush was in the White House. That usually doesn't happen. 2004, presidential year. Democrats did relatively well. They still ended up losing 3 seats in the House. 2006, they did very well. They actually swept across the board. I don't know what on earth that is. I think that's a bug on Jackson Jude. But they basically swept across the board, got more seats potentially ready for 2008, which actually didn't end up happening. Democrats almost won Wyoming in the House as recently as 2006. You might not think that's really possible now, but it happened as recently as 2006. People did not like Bush. But it really was a competition of turnout, and that worked in 2006. They managed to get those voters out, right? I mean, they even held 2 districts down here in Georgia. I mean, that's a pretty egregious gerrymander that got kicked out. So, you know, they were forced to fix it, and then Democrats swept all of that in 2008, and then lost most of it in 2010, and then it got redrawn in 2012, and then got redrawn, got basically swept in 2018, swept in 2020, that was because of high turnout there, and then got redrawn to give Republicans an extra district there with a gerrymander there, and they actually traded districts there in 2024. But anyway, there used to be a difficult time that the Democrats had being able to get their voters out. They were the low propensity party. And so they would win on some levels, like the presidency. And it's so weird seeing Democrat majorities in some of these southern regions across in the House. Because until 2010, they gerrymandered. The Democrats used to continually gerrymander these states so they could stay in power back from the 80s when they still won considerably. They had lost that in Florida, and Republicans used that to their advantage as well. I mean, look at that district of all things. This isn't a gerrymandering video, so I'm going to just quickly skirt over this. But, and so again, you end up with, yeah, this is a Democratic gerrymander state as well. And so then you have the fact that you end up doing great in 2008, but in 2010, that's a considerable loss. I mean, that is 64 seats flipping. And so basically across the entire country, Democrats did not show up. And so that's again kind of what happened in 2024. Democrats just didn't show up. It just wasn't necessarily to the same degree of what we now see in 2025, for example. In 2021, Democrats didn't really show up. In 2025, in all of these elections, Republicans aren't showing up. If you look in, and that wasn't even the problem in the first district. I mean, more Republicans went to vote than Petronas got votes, for example. So that was more than just that issue, but also just that this turnout dynamic here that is now created with Trump's party and Trump being the one to get these voters out to the polls really changes how they're going to have to be able to play things in order to win. Now, Republicans are going to need to get every single voter out they can. Now they're pushing for voter ID laws and things that make it sometimes more difficult to vote, can end up harming them in the long run. So that will potentially end up actually backfiring on them now that Democrats are the ones that are consistently turning out to vote. And it's not completely swapped around yet, right? In the midterms, it's probably not going to be as bad, but in 2027, you're not really going to be able to see those effects because, you have an incumbent in Louisiana. There's nobody good running in Mississippi, and Bashir is term limited in Kentucky, so that's going to flip. That's a free seat for Republicans. But it's not going to be a great year for Republicans if I had to bet. And in Mississippi, for example, another thing that happened, Democrats flipped a state House seat there and broke the supermajority in the House there. So more things that happened. And so even in deep red states like Mississippi, Democrats still showed out and have done well, just like in Iowa, where they flipped that state Senate seat there and broke the supermajority back in like May. It's continual of the same patterns that we've been seeing for the past few years, and increasingly so. The Republicans need to be able to figure out a way to get that turnout machine going. And so with that, they're going to need to focus. The number one test is going to be Mark Green's old seat in Tennessee. If Democrats can flip it, that means so much about what the midterms could look like. It's not an insanely competitive seat by any means, but it does have some of, not Nashville, but I can never remember the name of this city. 21 and a half seats, 21 and a half points. It's not even the closest one in that region, but it's only 21 and a half points. And so there have been large shifts like that before. If you look at 2016, 22.2 down to 3.2. That is a 17-point shift. Okay? 17 points. That would bring it down to 4. Even if you get it down to 5 points, that would still show a huge number. And there was a huge amount of Democrats. The Democrat turnout in the primaries for the district compared to the Republican turnout in the primaries for the district was only off by about 5%. So it is within reach. This will be a surprisingly competitive race on December 2nd. And so this is actually going to be something to watch. The fact that there's not really any polling. Van Epps is ahead by 8. By 8. This is a Democratic pollster. But considering the turnout dynamics this year, they are probably going to be more accurate than you might think. And so what you end up with is this is a concern, all right? Plus 3.7% margin of error. That means that Ben could win. Okay, Afton Ben could win. Plus 3.7 there, that's 47%. And minus 3% is actually 49. So actually, no, not quite, but very, very close. Undecided 3%, if they broke for her, then she could win. So this is the sort of issue. And then that's not including any polling error with sampling error or weighing error. So again, this is the problem that Republicans are going to run into. And so what they're going to need to do is to shift their coalition again. It's going to be extremely difficult, but they're going to need to shift their coalition again. They're losing suburbanites, right? They're losing college-educated voters. They're the ones that turn every single election. They're losing older voters, not by much, but they're losing suburban or urban older voters that they used to be the last few that were in some cities that still voted red, but now they're shifting while minorities are shifting to the right. They're losing college educated women are like completely gone from the Republican base. College educated people used to be a backbone of the Republican Party. So again, you have all of this that is changing the turnout dynamics, and Republicans are basically now staring down the barrel of a potential future continued blowouts until they can figure out a solution to this issue, either finding out some way to potentially increase turnout in basically every single election, or just change their coalition to get some higher propensity voters into that coalition, or they will continue to lose. And so what we have now is how this looks for 2026. This opens up a lot of doors for the Democrats. It doesn't necessarily change anything insanely, right? It's not saying, oh, all of a sudden now the Democrats are going to win Iowa, or oh, look, Sherrod Brown is now expected to win, right? That's not the story by any means here. Instead, what we do have, though, is some higher concerns. These chances that Republicans are going to hold the table is not as strong. Virginia is now going to be over 12 points, for example. It was right on the edge there, right? Warner won by a relatively considerable amount in re-election 2020, 12.1%. It is going to go by over 12 now. We know that for certain, right? So there are some things that are now set in stone, like Mississippi. That now I am 100% not sure that that's going to be over 12. Kansas, same thing. South Dakota absolutely is. Florida, absolutely not sure if it's going to be over 12 anymore, right? It's these sorts of things that are now going to change because of how these turnout dynamics are going to look in 2024. Oregon's going to be over 12. Colorado, now going to be over 12. We can see how far it shifted to the left, concerned that they passed those propositions, which are relatively liberal propositions. New Mexico, probably not, but going to be relatively considerably strong there, right? Now you're going to have these that are going to be likely, right, that they're not going to go to the Democrats out of nowhere. Again, it's not these ridiculous trends. I haven't updated this yet, but you could say that Ohio is now on extreme watch, right? Georgia is almost certain to go. That odds-wise, that's almost certain at this point. North Carolina, Roy Cooper is definitely in the lead now, probably close to about a 55% chance of victory, which this far out still is very strong. Democrats, even though we don't know who's going to win the primaries, are now in the lead in Maine just because of how strong that performance was. Because none of those sorts of voters would likely vote for Susan Collins again. New Hampshire, almost safe. Minnesota, I'd say, is safe. Texas, lean in the odds, most likely. Alaska, lean. Nebraska, lean against Dan Osborne. Iowa, lean. Michigan, likely. I mean, these sorts of turnout dynamics completely change the game. And so when you're looking ahead to 2026 and you're looking at potentially, there's going to be more Republicans that are showing out, especially if you have a convention that they're going to have in Las Vegas, which is a very intelligent idea, especially in a state like Nevada. They're really trying to propel that rightward motion. That did definitely help when they held, I believe, their convention in Columbus in 2016. um, they're trying to help propel the state forward, continue trending to the right. And that may end up helping again get that turnout, especially in a state like Nevada, where you have the governor who's running again, relatively popular, Joe Lombardo. And so, I mean, he won't need any help if Sisolak wins the primaries again. But if you have a good candidate on there, then maybe it could be a bit competitive. I think, honestly, a better state would be somewhere like Georgia, because both of those are going to be competitive. You could, in theory, knock off Ossoff. Very unlikely at this point, but it's still possible. But that governor's race, with how strong Democrats just performed in the commissioner's race, I'm starting to really question if they are actually in the lead now. Their bench isn't too strong, but that is a state that I'd absolutely watch come 2026. I think it absolutely could outperform expectations yet again, and this really just completely changed the game. And it always just reminds you how crazy politics always is, no matter how into it how much you know, it's almost always going to surprise you. So this was a long one. I hope that if you did listen all the way through, I appreciate it a lot. Most people don't, these longer videos don't tend to do that well. So if you did listen all the way through, please do let me know in the comments what you think, your ideas. And I love to have discussions about this sort of thing as well. If you're a creator on here and you want to do a collaboration during the low period, then absolutely do send me an email that is available on my profile there as well, or you can send me a message on socials. I do be on our Instagram. So thank you all so much for watching. Make sure to give recommendations for video ideas, because there's literally like not much of anything. If I look real quick at the future elections, I mean, look in Australia, I mean, 2025, there's, just a few council elections, Liberal Party leadership election, Tasmania's already over, Australian state election, or Senate election's already over. So there's that. The next thing that really comes up is 2026 Victorian state election, South Australian state election, Tasmanian local isn't necessarily that big of a deal. So that's it, right? Um, that's not that late into the beginning of the year though. So, 2026 Victorian state election is that's in November. So that is very late, but South Australian is in March. So that's not extremely far away, but it's still a while away from now. In Canada, 2026, you have Ontario. That's just municipal elections, though. Ottawa municipal election, Toronto mayoral election, right? So there's nothing necessarily insane. 2026 mayoral calendar, there's not really anything here. Quebec general election. This is going to be the main one, October 5th. Okay, so there's like nothing happening in Canada either. And then if you look in America, there's nothing happening all the way until, with the exception of the special election, the House district. You have, for Mark Green's old seat, there's nothing really there, right? United States elections, you have Senate, House, and gubernatorial elections. That's about it, right? And here's the new map in Ohio, which is now officially confirmed as well. That's new Missouri map, new Texas, and they did in fact put in the new California map, so there is that now officially in there because it has been projected to pass. So again, all right, everything that's about it there. Thank you again all so much for watching. And so again, give me your ideas. If you want to collab, let me know, and have a fantastic rest of your day.